Welcome. For years, the medical community has really understood cannabis as this powerful therapeutic tool.
Mm.
I mean, if a patient comes in with severe vomiting, our instinct, our training tells us to suggest it. It's known to soothe nausea.
To quell hyperemesis, exactly.
But the profound medical contradiction we're exploring today is this. For a growing number of long-term users, the substance it stops being a cure.
It flips. It becomes the trigger for a debilitating illness.
And that illness is cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, or CHS.
Right. It's defined by these severe cyclical vomiting attacks. They're just agonizing for the patient and, frankly, often baffling for the clinician in the ER.
So today, we're going to extract 5 urgent medical truths about this condition.
That's the plan. These are curated specifically to help you, as frontline healthcare professionals, improve recognition and, speed up that whole diagnostic process.
Okay, let's start with the heart of it all. What is the central, almost unbelievable contradiction that clinicians need to grasp here?
The contradiction is all in its dose-dependent action. It's biphasic.
Biphasic, meaning it does 2 different things.
Exactly. At low doses, cannabinoids act on certain receptors, specifically the CB1 receptors in the brainstem. And that's what gives it that well-known anti-nausea effect.
You're right, that's standard physiology, what we all learned.
It is. But with repeated chronic high-dose use, the effect completely reverses.
It just flips on its head.
It does. It's likely due to receptor saturation, dysregulation. The CD1 receptors in the gut get overwhelmed, and that leads to delayed gastric motility.
Which causes the pain and the vomiting.
The severe abdominal pain and the uncontrollable hyperemesis. The very thing that should stop the vomiting, well, now it's starting it.
That's a staggering biological reversal, but what makes this so cruel for the patient, from a behavioral standpoint, especially when they're in an acute episode?
It creates this vicious feedback loop. It's a self-sustaining cycle that is incredibly difficult for them to break.
Because they think it's their medicine.
Precisely. When a patient is in the throes of a vomiting episode, their instinct is to reach for the cannabis. And here's the kicker.
What's that?
Acute use often provides a fleeting, temporary sense of relief.
So it actually works for a moment.
For maybe 10 minutes, it takes the edge off. But that temporary comfort tragically reinforces their belief that the substance isn't the cause, it's the treatment. It just cements the habit.
Wow. So they're essentially treating themselves with the poison that's making them sick.
Absolutely. And you have to understand that reality from their perspective to approach counseling with the compassion it requires.
Okay, let's pivot to the emergency room. It's busy. Dozens of possible gastrointestinal diagnoses are flying around. What's the one single, highly distinctive patient behavior that should immediately raise suspicion for CHS?
You're looking for the learned compulsive need to take incredibly hot baths or showers.
Hot bath.
Yes. This is often the most powerful and unique diagnostic signal you have as the attending physician. These patients are desperate. We hear reports of them spending hours, sometimes days, just going back and forth between the ER and their bathtub at home.
So this is more than just finding comfort. It's a frantic, life-interrupting measure. Why the heat? What's the mechanism there?
The mechanism connects right back to that complex receptor system we mentioned. The transient receptor, potential phenyloid 1, or TRPV1 receptor.
CRPV1.
Right. These receptors are in the skin, the gut, the brain. They respond to heat, pain, and capsaicin, the active ingredient in chili peppers.
So when they blast their abdomen with hot water,
they're overwhelming those TRPV1 receptors in the skin.
They're short-circuiting the pain signals, distracting the nervous system with this external heat.
Precisely. That specific signal, that hot shower compulsion, it cuts through all the diagnostic noise and it points directly towards CHS. If you hear that in triage, your suspicion should go way up.
Okay, that's a vital behavioral cue. And yet, CHS is notoriously hard to diagnose. I mean, what's the average delay from first symptoms to an accurate diagnosis?
The average time is staggering, 4.1 years.
4 years.
4.1 years. Think about that. 4 years of suffering, repeated hospitalizations, misdiagnoses. It's a tremendous burden on the patient and on the whole healthcare system.
That's just agonizing. Why such a long delay, especially when that hot shower clue is so specific?
Well, the diagnosis is complicated by 4 interconnected factors. First, patient reluctance.
Right.
Patients are often hesitant to disclose their full usage history. There's stigma, legal concerns, or they just fear judgment. If you add that history, the diagnosis is impossible.
1 second.
Second, the attacks are episodic, they're cyclical. A patient might go for weeks, even months between vomiting episodes.
So their primary care provider might not see the pattern.
Exactly. They see them during a symptom-free period and they go down the path of, functional dyspepsia or some common stomach bug.
And the history of use itself is inconsistent, isn't it? It's not just new users.
Not at all. The onset is delayed and is highly variable. We see patients develop this syndrome after less than a year of use.
And on the other end?
On the other end, we see it in people who have used regularly for more than 11 years. There's just no reliable time threshold for clinicians to hang their hat on.
And that variability must lead to a lot of misdiagnoses.
It does. The most common confusion is with cyclic vomiting syndrome, CVS.
Which also has cyclical vomiting.
Right, but CVS typically lacks that pathognomonic sign of compulsive hot bathing.
I see.
And finally, you have the formal diagnostic requirements themselves. They demand something you simply can't confirm during an acute visit.
What's that?
They require the symptoms to completely resolve after the patient sustains complete cessation. That long-term resolution is the ultimate diagnostic proof.
So a physician has to suspect it, treat the crisis, and then the final confirmation depends on the patient making a major lifestyle change over weeks or months.
It really requires a leap of faith from the patient and a lot of support from the physician because the proof is always retrospective.
Let's talk about that acute crisis. Patient is in the ER, you suspect CHS. What are the standard antiemetics, the first-line drugs we always use?
They often fail. And that failure is in itself a diagnostic clue.
Which ones specifically?
Medications like ondansetron, Zofran, and metoclopramide, they are frequently completely ineffective against this specific type of hyperemesis. It leaves patients suffering and doctors feeling frustrated.
So if your first-line drugs aren't making a dent?
You must consider CHS and pivot quickly to unconventional therapies.
Okay, so if the standard options fail, the guidelines now point to 2 unconventional alternatives. What is the first one, and what's the critical safety check?
The first recommended treatment is the antipsychotic medication, haloperidol. Before you administer it, you must get an electrocardiogram, an ECG.
Why is that ECG so essential?
You have to check for QTc prolongation.
Which is?
It's a dangerous lengthening of the heart's electrical recovery period. Haloperidol has a known risk of causing or worsening this condition, which can lead to a potentially fatal irregular heartbeat called torsades de pointe.
Suspect CHS, standard meds fail, move to haloperidol, but only after that cardiac screen.
What about the second unconventional treatment, the chili pepper cream?
The second highly effective alternative is capsaicin cream.
You're putting chili cream on the patient's stomach to stop them from vomiting.
It sounds counterintuitive, I know. But you apply this topical cream, which has the active component of chili peppers, directly to the abdomen.
How on earth does that work?
It goes right back to the hot shower clue and those TRPV1 receptors. Capsaicin is a potent activator of those exact same receptors.
The theory is that applying concentrated capsaicin to the skin overwhelms the TRPV1 receptors locally. This massive external distraction might just disrupt the confused signals traveling between the gut and the brainstem.
It's like a pharmacological version of the hot shower.
That's a perfect way to put it. It provides a profound distraction to the central nervous system.
It's fascinating, turning the patient's own learned behavior into a clinical intervention. But these are just stopgaps, right? Haloperidol, capsaicin, they manage the crisis. What is the only definitive long-term solution?
The only solution is complete and sustained abstinence from all cannabinoids.
All of them.
All of them. There is no partial measure that works. Without cessation, the syndrome will inevitably come back.
And as we discussed at the start, that's often the most difficult conversation for the patient to accept.
It really is. The key barrier is cognitive dissonance. It's created by their own history.
The belief that it's medicine.
For years, they may have relied on it for anxiety or chronic pain or sleep. And their most recent memory is that fleeting relief they got during a vomiting spell. They just can't reconcile that the thing they see as medicine is the cause of this intense suffering.
So it takes a lot of education.
Intensive education, counseling, and a highly compassionate approach to help them accept that total cessation is the only cure.
Cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, it completely turns the traditional anti-nausea playbook on its head, doesn't it?
It really does. It shows the relationship between cannabis and the human body is just far more complex, more paradoxical than we traditionally understood.
And these new guidelines are vital.
They are. They're finally equipping frontline ER doctors with the specific knowledge and the unconventional tools they need to recognize and treat these patients who've often been suffering in confusion for years.